Welcome to a special episode of Firebreathing Kittens. This is our rules discussion, where I will read the rules feedback people had for the tabletop role-playing games we've played recently. I will read the feedback for the tabletop role-playing games Tales from the Loop, DC 20, Sexy Battle Wizards, Tiny Pirates, Into the Odd, Fudge Lite, Dragonbane, Outgunned, Black Powder and Brimstone, and Coriolis the Third Horizon. Let's dive right in, reading these reviews written by our Firebreathing Kittens players and game masters. The episode Rewind to Remember featured the ttrpg system Tales from the Loop. The first review says, I really like the little vignettes, the scenes. It helped build a cool story. I don't know how this works for a long-term series of sessions, because in our one-shot, we went back in time, learned about the past, and came back to the present. But how many sessions would we loop for in a long-term campaign? Would we need to come back, or would the whole campaign happen in the past? Oh, and I was excited that we got to pick our favorite song from the 80s, although I'm not sure what that had to do with the game itself. Our second review says, I didn't read any of the GM stuff, so I recognize I'm speaking without knowledge, but it feels like a system that really requires a GM who loves away-from-the-table prep to make these mysteries. The system seems really tied to narratives of discovery as the primary form of conflict, rather than combat like Dungeons & Dragons. I like the theme. I think the system lends itself well to the theme, but I think you have to have a really clear session zero about what types of stories you're setting up. We had one combat, and I'm not sure how much more exciting having more than one combat would have been, because I found my groove of what actions I do in combat, and I just do them. Maybe if the GM had set up multiple clocks where taking out the time to go talk to your anchor means you didn't go do something else and missed out on it, that could keep the stakes high, but that's one more thing this system is asking the GM to keep an eye on and be mindful of, to maintain those multiple clocks to raise that tension, because we characters don't have any risk of dying. The third review says, Tales from the Loop has 6 guiding principles. 1. Your hometown is full of strange and fantastic things. 2. Everyday life is dull and unforgiving. 3. Adults are out of reach and out of touch. 4. The land of the loop is dangerous, but kids will not die. 5. The game is played scene by scene. 6. The world is described collaboratively. Principle 5, where the game is played scene by scene, reminded me of the game Good Society, which is also played in scenes. Principle 6, where the world is described collaboratively, reminded me of the game Action 12 Cinema, which is also played in scenes and everybody establishes the basis for those scenes collaboratively, too. Of those 3 games, I prefer Good Society the most, because each player has an individual goal they want to achieve from the scene. Without each player having a goal they want to accomplish from the scene, the stakes are low, and the pace stagnates a little. To make a comment about combat in Tales from the Loop, the number of dice the players have available to them to roll being 7 for some actions and 2 for other actions surprisingly had the effect that they were punished severely for trying to do anything other than their maximum dice action in combat. It reminded me of Powered by the Apocalypse style games in that regard, where you have that one thing you're good at, and you keep spamming that button, because if you try anything else, you're much less likely to succeed at that action. In Dungeons & Dragons, wizards have multiple spells, and martial classes can shove, parry, dodge, etc., so the combat isn't just repeating one action over and over, so combat is more varied than in Tales from the Loop. The luck and push mechanics were nice, because they gave the players a bit more stakes and something to do, but overall, the combination of pre-scripting the scenes a little bit, which was the worst part of Action 12 Cinema, not having the individual goals that Good Society gives each character to try to accomplish during a scene, And repeating the same action during combat like Powered by the Apocalypse games means Tales from the Loop isn't a system I'd personally want to play again. The episode Shape of Swamp Water featured the RPG system DC-20. DC-20 plays like a letter to D&D. I can see that they are trying to solve some of the problems and complaints that are part of D&D. But with that said, it's a beta, so I know they will address some of these issues that we ran into. They will improve it as the game develops. From a GMing perspective, I would like to see the conditions cleaned up so that they don't just reference other conditions. Currently, you have to cross-reference to get to the definition you're looking for. I would like to see some of the terminology ironed out. I don't think we'll be the only group to be confused by the wording on initiative. I do like the static math, and I didn't think I would. The fact that you have a single d20 roll and that determines how much damage you do, as well as additional effects, rather than rolling d6s and d8s, and do I have to add a d4 for damage? I don't miss rolling all those extra dice. I'm very optimistic about the system, and I'd like to see it more polished. Our next review says, "The rulebook is so clunky. It is not laid out well. It's not laid out intuitively. I found it incredibly difficult to build a character. It references things in the character creation that are talked about both before and after the character creation, so you have to read the whole rulebook before you can build a character. The combat mechanics were funky and clunky, and initiative was not intuitive or made sense to me at all. The initiative section of the rulebook, when we checked it, didn't explain initiative. The combat, even though it was clunky, was still fun. I can see the seeds of good things there. They just need to pare it away. There's just too much." Our next review says, "DC-20 is very similar to Dungeons & Dragons. I'd lump it in with the other games that are based on D&D. Getting 4 action points per turn was a bit unusual. Getting to do like 3 actions every turn was a lot. I'm not sure if that's good or bad, just different." Our next review says, "There are some interesting complexities about this DC-20 system. It can be a very drawn-out system that is challenging to run for a one-shot. The action economy doesn't lend itself to quick resolution. It'd be great for a long-term campaign as long as they address some of the broken issues that we brought up as part of the session." The episode Grandma Cricket and the Library of Truth featured the ttrpg system Sexy Battle Wizards. Our first review says, "I enjoy this game. It's quite simple and gives lots of opportunities for people to leave their comfort zone." Our second reviewer said, "Always enjoy this game. I love how simple and easy this is to play, and I feel it allows lots of creativity." Our next reviewer says, "I like the simplicity and think the castle idea is really cute for how you go get your powers. That said, it feels hard to match with characters who have access to magic to begin with. The 3 stats feels really nice and better than 2-stat systems. I like the system. Don't like the idea of blowing up and coming back, though." Another reviewer said, "I think this system is charming in its simplicity, but is very dependent on the players to bring whatever vibe they want. That gives it its strongest points and its weakest points, in that some players can feel very comfortable going all out into the system, while others can rely on their comfort zone to persist." The episode What a Maroon featured the RPG system Tiny Pirates. Our first reviewer said, "The rules for Tiny Pirates, like all the Tiny D6 games, are very simple and straightforward. At most, you need 3 6-sided dice. You'll usually roll 2d6 and succeed if any are a 5 or 6. If you have advantage, you roll 3 dice, and if you have disadvantage, you roll 1 dice. I got confused at one point during the episode and said you roll 2d6 and take the lower roll, but that is inaccurate. Sorry, listeners. The main problem for me with the rulebook is that while disadvantage is mentioned several times in the book, how advantage/disadvantage rules aren't given their own section in the rulebook, and there is no index in the book, so if you're quickly trying to look it up, you have to know it's in the, quote, tests section. This was not the only time I longed for an index in the game, by the way. We played with some advancements already applied, and although the viewers at home didn't know this, we had at least one player who did not know how to advance their character and was a little underdeveloped as a result. Like playing a level 1 character with a group of level 5s. Not game-breaking, but maybe felt a little underpowered and not as amazing as they might have been. Aside from that, mechanically, Tiny Pirates is a pretty easy game to play. We didn't really explore all it had to offer in this session, as I focused our story on a shipwreck, so we didn't have the dueling rules or even a ship battle, which would have been fun. Maybe next time. But for what was essentially a bottle episode, the mechanics were lightweight and supported, but stayed out of the way of the story, and that's really what I want in my RPGs. The next reviewer said, Tiny Pirates was a pretty simple system to understand. I haven't played a sea-based system before. Even though we didn't get to use the sailing or dueling mechanics, it seemed like it would be fun. The next reviewer said, my feedback is that I really like the Tiny Pirates system, and I'd love to play it again. My only thing is I'd like to use some of the ship mechanics next time. The next reviewer said, I quite enjoyed using the system. The only thing that I wish I could change is, when there is a test, there should be something describing what to use for the test. For example, if I was trying to persuade someone to buy a necklace off of me, you could say it's a persuasion test instead of just a test, and say, oh yeah, I'll use my charismatic trait to help me get advantage. For me, that would make it a little more clear to know what I'm rolling for. I like the simplicity of only using d6s, and that the damage is fixed based on the weapons you have, either 1 or 2 damage, so you don't have to do a lot of math. I didn't get the chance to use ship combat, but regular combat is simple. When you succeed, you go before the enemy, and when you fail, you go after the enemy, making initiative a lot simpler. The episode Dust to Dust featured the ttrpg system Into the Odd. Our first reviewer said, Into the Odd is a very good system for short exploration-type stories. The focus in the rulebook is quite often just on Arcana, so there's not much guidance for role-playing rules or story rules, so it could use some of that. But overall, it makes for a great Indiana Jones-style adventure. Our next reviewer said, I liked Into the Odd overall. I thought that it's a well-balanced system. The rules for character creation and where you play are streamlined, where there's not a lot to learn. It's easy to pick up. Conversely, there's a lot of background material and guidance for the GM, which I think is the right way around. It has quite a strong flavor. It also has a lot of freedom within the rules. It's not a rigid rules system. You can flavor things a lot of different ways. It encourages creativity. Our next reviewer said, Into the Odd has simple rules with lots of flavor. I personally like more complex mechanics. I think the game could benefit from slightly more complex mechanics, particularly doing the math to get balanced skill checks. For example, someone not auto-succeeding on a will save because they rolled beneath their stat number. But the flavor is great, and that lent itself to a really fun game. Our next reviewer says, Into the Odd has 2 things that can create an environment where a player gets away with whatever they want. The first is its under and over skill check rules, which have no layers of success, but simply a you succeeded or you failed result. The second is its pages and pages and pages of Arcana, each of which gives the player a different, unique, uncounterable ability. These 2 things combine to create the sort of storytelling environment that could surprise a GM with what the player is proposing to do. The episode Death Comes to Market featured the RPG system Fudge Lite. Our first reviewer said, Fudge Lite is very flexible. It lends itself to different adventure types. Easy to make characters, easy to make NPCs, easy to make adversaries. It's also easy to track. It's simple to do combat. The mechanics are very easy, so it makes it very simple to run the mechanics while trying to focus on the story. Our next reviewer said, I like that Fudge Lite is a flexible system. Very moldable to the GM's style. I just think it's very easy to avoid ever encountering weaknesses. If your character isn't good with, say, strength, it's easy to avoid ever needing to use strength because you can find a way around it, which could be considered unbalanced in some way. Our next reviewer said, First experience with Fudge Lite. Felt like our character creation was pretty high level, which I think made it easier to lean into strengths and avoid weaknesses. Made me curious what lower level play would be like. It seems like it puts a greater onus on a GM to create the pressure cooker if they want their players to be forced into experiencing their weaknesses in a way that just happens more naturally for a system like Dungeons & Dragons. Really enjoyed my first experience. Loved the flexibility of the system. Looking forward to playing around with it in the future. Our next reviewer says, I was a bit confused by the Fudge Lite mechanics because the rules say a +3 is superb and can affect the whole crowd of enemies for the entire duration of the scene. But with opposed GM roles, which possibly were in the GM section of the rules, I only read the player part, I often got a +3 superb, but some kind of invisible subtraction happened and I didn't impact all the enemies. Maybe the rulebook could use some additional clarification on the impact of what a player's roles mean to reduce my confusion as to the numbers' interpretations. The episode Bodies, Botany, and Bleeding Hearts featured the RPG system Dragonbane. Our first reviewer said, Dragonbane could use some clarification on spell casting, upcasting levels. The combat mechanics are still really fun. The abilities add an interesting flavor to it. Our next reviewer said, I like Dragonbane. Definitely feel like it would be easier to learn if I played it from the beginning and not as high of a level. I do think battle mechanics are a little limiting as far as actions and reactions. Like you either can hit or react. You can only do one thing at a time. But I like having all the skill options though. Our next reviewer said, I like Dragonbane. I have to say I like the rulebook. Free League always does a fantastic job of presenting their books. I think we didn't quite explore the system enough. It's something that would benefit from a longer campaign, more sessions. There is some richness we didn't get into, such as dodging, parrying, pushing, conditions. But what was there, I thought it was cleanly designed. The rules came together quite well. The only thing I was slightly concerned about, and maybe this is a feature of the system rather than a bug, is that it did seem like there's quite a high risk of deadliness in the combat because the players don't have very many hit points, and the hit points don't increase when leveling up. The foes were high danger. But maybe that's the design intent. And not all of the enemies have to roll for all of their effects, so I was worried that combat could easily get out of hand and become lethal. I like that Dragonbane is a good complexity level. It's got enough skills and elements to it to allow a bit of depth, but it's not overly complex. You could get used to it quite quickly and play it for a long time. It's a good D&D level quality system, like a slightly grittier D&D with some interesting twists. The episodes Sharky Seas and Where There Be Sharks featured the RPG system Outgunned. Our first review said, more clarification on the rules for rerolls and the consequences for failures would be a little bit better. There's not much detail on what failures are. There's way more detail on other things, and they can probably parse out that detail. Overall, it was a fun and unique system. Our second reviewer said, "The Outgunned rules were pretty simple. I was glad that I had help with the character sheet. As for everything else, it just took a few minutes to learn the feats and what abilities you can do. After a while of playing through and doing things combining different options, it was pretty clear. You just gotta play." Our third reviewer said, "I thought Outgunned was good. I didn't mind the mechanics. I did struggle a little bit with trying to use enchantment magic because all my character can do is explosions. And he can normally enchant them to do paralysis, etc., but none of the weapons did that." Our next reviewer said, "For Outgunned, the section in the rulebook that explains how to re-roll doesn't have an example for what to do if you have 2 pairs of matching dice, like 2 basic successes. If you have 2 1s and 2 5s, do you pick a pair and re-roll the other pair? Or do you re-roll only the non-matched single dice? It doesn't clarify. I am not a big fan of when a rulebook partially explains a term across multiple pages. I prefer to see the entire explanation in one section. Flipping around to several pages to fully understand the mechanic of how that term works is not ideal." Our next reviewer said, "I like the base mechanics of Outgunned. I like how it's based on matching numbers instead of a sum of the numbers, or 6s being better than 1s. You got 3 1s, that's pretty good. And it's balanced. I did not like how it's sure you can make magic work in it, but it's not designed for it. You had to reskin things and almost make up skills for it. You can make it work, but you need to make it work." Our next reviewer said, "Outgunned has a lot of really well thought out options. A really wide variety of situations are covered, and highly customizable characters. The downside is that you can use magic in it, but it is clearly designed for mundane humans only. The thing I don't like about it is even though you can use magic, it's subjective what skills count for what when you make a character with this system. So that's going to create arguments with the players and the GM. Not all magic is an attack. Levitating things is not a shoot skill. Grasping vines was a brute force roll, I guess. That's almost like I'm wrestling them to the ground. But no, it's a forest of vines pinning you to the ground. I do think it's a good system that has enough complexity to cover a wide variety of situations. Especially that there are chase mechanics. That's really cool that they thought about that and have mechanics for it." Our next reviewer said, "That was a cool action-centered game. The Outgunned rules weren't super clear on re-rolling, what a free re-roll is versus what a regular re-roll is. I didn't feel like that was as clearly laid out as I would have liked." Our next reviewer said, "I liked the mechanics of Outgunned. They're unique compared to other TTRPGs. They remind me of a dice game called Skunk that I play with my grandparents, so it was really cool to see something like that. I think that there's a little bit too much complexity going on with the system. It would benefit from a little bit more simplicity. It took a while for us to learn to play it. There's a better way to phrase the rules to take out the complexity and get players into it right at the start of the game." The episode Rock the Boat featured the RPG system Black Powder and Brimstone. Our first reviewer said, "As someone who hasn't played with Morkborg, this seemed like playing an expansion without playing the main game. Still a lot of fun, but a lot of things had to be clarified. What grappling and stunning did to the players wasn't explained on page 38. Does it mean we can't move or can't attack, or the difficulty rating increases by 2? I think Black Powder and Brimstone would work well for a classic dungeon crawler, where combat is the most important thing, but it doesn't work well for narrative as much. You feel like you're making up reasons to do checks. Playing as a tank character, it's fun, but if I preferred rogues or bards, I think I would get bored." Our next reviewer said, "Black Powder and Brimstone has some rules changes and rule book changes versus Morkborg that I'm not a fan of. For example, the PDF is not searchable text. Another example is that the weapons display on page 77 is just a picture of weapons hanging in midair in black powder and brimstone, but in Merkborg it's an artful, gory display of weapons stabbing a person and the stats for each weapon next to the image of the weapon. The Game Master rolling for if the enemies see a stealthed player character or not also removes the player's agility stat from the calculation. Our next reviewer said, "It seemed like an easy system to abuse if you're a power gamer because of the help mechanic, because of how many things are nested under the presence attribute. It felt like you could do so much. I liked, having played a bit of Merkborg, the designer of this game incorporating the clocks mechanic from Forged in the Dark games. We didn't make use of position and effect at all, but I feel those would both be helpful mechanics for regulating the tempo of challenges." The episode Just Trying to Pay Rent featured the RPG system Coriolis the Third Horizon. Our first reviewer said, "I don't like playing with games that have specified successes and failures or varying levels of success because you have to have the rulebook open all the time. I understand why they organized it the way they did, but it led to a lot of back and forth. It would be better for a player to have it organized so that everything related to each other in a combat is right next to each other. For example, the metacurgy skill doesn't say how much you can heal. You have to go to the first aid section for that. Once we started playing, it felt more natural, but reading it was really hard to get a grasp of what mechanics would look like and feel like while playing. There's a learning curve reading it versus playing it." Our second reviewer says, "I think of it in comparison to D&D. Lots of detail, lots of world building within the rulebook. So I think in time it would be really coherent and you just know by rote how to do everything. But difficult early on and somewhat scattered information from an organizational standpoint. It's hard to find the thing you need for the section of play that you're doing. It would be great if they had, here's an example flow and what this looks like. Steep learning curve and disorganized information. If it was organized, it would help with the learning curve." Coriolis the Third Horizon. "I enjoyed looking at the rules, and I think that the world is quite well built. It's interesting. It's got lots of hooks and intriguing detail in it. So it's quite an inviting environment to play in. But I don't think the rule structure helps with that. There's quite a lot to get a handle on. It's not easy to pick up. You're second-guessing yourself, flipping through a book, asking if you're missing something. It's not easy to pick up. If you had more time and you were playing a longer campaign, you would get that system mastery in time, but it's not something that's easy to achieve. And the system was quite bitty. There's a different set of rules for ship-to-ship and person-to-person combat, a whole different set of rules for you to learn how to do. They're similar but different, and the flow is not obvious. I suppose you would learn to master that in time, but the spaceship combat rules were not obvious or particularly tactically engaging. I think the flavor was really good. The rules were not my favorite, but not terrible." Our next reviewer says, "The Coriolis the Third Horizon rulebook would benefit from a combat quick play guide, where everything you need to do combat is in one section, or ideally on one page, instead of flipping to multiple sections of the book. One-page rule summaries are very good." That's our feedback on Tales from the Loop, DC-20, Sexy Battle Wizards, Tiny Pirates, Into the Odd, Fudge Lite, Dragonbane, Outgunned, Black Powder and Brimstone, and Coriolis the Third Horizon. Favorite games? Ooh, I get to share my opinion now. Dragonbane and Outgunned were both great. Dragonbane has a beautiful rulebook with a lot of meat for combat mechanics and spells to explore that would be interesting for future game sessions. Outgunned's rulebook really frustrated me and could use some condensing. But that mechanic of matching dice instead of looking at what number they were was fun and different from most other games. Well, thank you for joining us for this rules feedback chat. I hope that this interested you, and perhaps if you want to hear these rules played, you could go listen to those episodes. The title of each episode was listed with the rules feedback for that system. And hopefully, if you like hearing it played and you're interested in the rules, you can try this game with your own friends and play a game yourself. Bye-bye!